All right, so I wanted to start by going back to the council meeting and having you sort of summarize this discussion about this conditional use permit for the new athletic facilities at various locations in the Marshfield School District. There seemed to be some tension on Tuesday night between Ron Staromski and the council members who were questioning him and his designer about this, what they have planned for over by the high school. Apparently there's some questions about parking and that sort of thing. But I guess summarize the discussion from your vantage point, what you heard, maybe some of your concerns moving forward, and then your take on the council, I guess, narrowly passing this 6-4 on not Tuesday, Monday night.
Sure, it was an interesting discussion that took place, and there was a point where I did have to ask Ron for his patience. I don't think that they are aware of the sensitivity that the council has gone through with the whole 8th and Hemlock situation over there. Now, what we were actually talking about is the baseball field over by the high school, but the sensitivity is still there of is there going to be enough parking and everything else. Now, so let's just break it down. In Ron's understanding and in his very valid defense, the plan that was put together with Josh and others in the city following the city statutes and the city codes. So of course they would be a little bit frustrated with the fact of, okay, look, we're following your rules and we're questioning it. So that part I totally get. I don't think what Ron and the developer really understood was how much heat we took from the 8th and Hemlock situation that took over there when we were considering selling that. And theoretically, there's enough parking over at the middle school for events over there. Well, we all know that that is not the case. So the old ice rink that is now a parking lot, or used as a parking lot, gets used a lot, and people that don't park there park in that surrounding area, go into people's driveways. There's safety concerns over there and everything. So of course the council is dealing with that sensitivity that we just got over there, and then we transferred that to this new area, that the council transferred that sensitivity to this new project that's going on over with the baseball field. Council's still licking their wounds from the public coming out, justifiably so, with their concerns. And I will say that although all the rules were met, I really didn't get the fact that Ron, with all due respect to him, because I do respect him, was really understanding the sensitivity to that. And I think that really, as they come forward with more proposals, I think it's really quite a simple solution. He's right. They are following the rules that we set out. Maybe just put an emphasis there that you're aware of the sensitivity to the parking and the sensitivity of the council to the parking, and I think it's going to go fine. I will tell you, I had a previously scheduled meeting yesterday because I spoke with Nathan Delaney at the high school regarding these sensitivities. He called me because he was aware, and I met with Dr. Christensen yesterday, Pat Saucerman and Nathan Delaney, and this was a big part of our discussion. And what I really, really like is we walk out of that discussion with an understanding of this is how the city feels and this is how the school district feels. And I will tell you, we all walked out of that meeting really quite relieved. So I'm very optimistic about the future of everything going through very smoothly. And we are working very hard to reestablish, or should I say, establish a good working relationship with the school board members. Last night I was with Dr. Christensen's meet and greet, and I spoke with some other school board members there. It was a very positive thing. So I think we are all on the same page in this great city of the city and the school board. If we really unite and move forward, it really could be a great thing. Also, they have a very, very good thing that they're talking about with their tax rate that is not out yet, but it should be out later on today, that is incredible. So we're very excited about that.
Steve, could you just actually clarify what actually was approved? Take us through this conditional use permit and what the council said yes to on Monday night. Maybe it's just some of the details of that, and I guess just where we go to from here after Monday night now.
Yeah, what was on the table that came from Plan Commission was the site plan review and approval for the new athletic facilities. The issue of planning and zoning is always complicated. You've got the campus master plan, you got conditional use permits, you've got rezonings, and it all starts to blur together. And not only is that bad enough when you're talking about one site, but now you're talking about multiple sites, because obviously the whole 8th and Hemlock thing is a little bit detached from this, but it all relates in terms of whether or not we're meeting the public needs. So really what they approved was just specifically a conditional use permit for these facilities, which was required because I believe of some of the, probably setbacks or whatever else was involved with it, as far as making sure that it meets all the requirements. But specifically to allow this. But you heard Ron, and I think maybe the gentleman from Retler say rather clearly, a campus master plan is being submitted to the city right now. In fact, maybe it was submitted before that meeting, or was being submitted this week, for the purpose of clarifying it all. How is us all going to come together? Where's the growth going to occur? What are the expectations going to be for green space and landscaping and parking and all those kind of things? Almost like when you say to somebody, can you give us authorization to have this piece? And we'll show you the big picture here later. Which is why you heard members of the council say, I want to see the whole picture now, because they're a little leery of whether it's all going to work out based upon what's going on by the middle school. But in order to keep them moving, and they really want to begin construction yet this season, they needed this approval to actually start working on the site, is my misunderstanding.
Do you think there needs to be, do you think there would be action from the Planning Commission and Council to look at that section of code if there are this many concerns with parking? Because you said that they met all the requirements of the code, correct?
They do. The question you heard raised loud and clear is whether or not the on-street parking is something that can be counted upon and is reasonable for an assumption. That portion of the expectation. If you look what's going on now by Beal Stadium, that's part of the issue. There's parking there, but there's also a lot of on-street parking. Is that acceptable?
But, do you think there would be a need, or even just a thought to send it to Planning Commission quick to say, hey, you want to just take a peek at this and make sure that we're really doing it right? Because, if there's that many concerns with parking, I'd be concerned that either one, the council is not understanding, or two, the code is written in a way that doesn't meet the actual needs. I don't know if that's a...
Yeah, you heard the one space per four, I forget how it works, but that whole formula was called into question a little bit that night. And some of the zoning codes weren't written yesterday either, so you have to look and see whether or not it's current. The three choices they had that night were approve it, reject it, or send it back for more study. And they could have sent it back for more study on the parking issue. They chose not to by a narrow margin. I think what they told us, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, I think what they told us is, okay, as a collective, we're going to sign on to this, but we want to see the whole picture. We want to see this master plan. We want to know that you're addressing the parking and traffic needs so that we can feel comfortable telling the citizens we're not going to end up with similar type of concerns elsewhere as a result of these new facilities.
And to clarify, there was a conditional use permit for the parking at the baseball field that was approved in May, correct?
I'm forgetting how that went. You remember, Bob?
I believe there was, but I'll have to get back to you on that to confirm it. But I do believe you're right.
Okay.
Oh, we're good.
So I was going to ask about it sounds like, did you have anything else on that?
No.
Okay. I wouldn't be, it sounded like, so the council then authorized staff to enter into agreement for services with redevelopment resources for creation of a TIF district across basically the Casey Hall property. It sounds like there's something in the works. Kind of summarize that part of the meeting from Monday, and I don't know, pretty exciting that it looks like there's going to be some redevelopment of that property.
It would appear that way, and which is why we're looking at this opening up of a TIF district there. because that would be part of it. But there is some interest in developing that, but we're still in the gaining information phase. And the first part of it is the TIF established.
Okay, so no specifics.
Not at this time.
No, we really can't. One of the things that people approach us in confidence, and at some point the name of a company and a type of development will come out. Right now, we just have to help them see whether the council would be willing to put a TIF district in place to make the financing possible to help with this project. I can tell you this though, from a TIF perspective, it's a great site because it's not taxable right now. So, we're not receiving any taxes from the Knights of Columbus parcel because they're nonprofits. So that gives us a good starting point if we do want to provide assistance, which has not been decided yet. But if we do provide some assistance, that from $1 on that improvement and anything that they build, we'll be seeing increment that helps to pay off any debt that we incur. But I would like to think, to be honest with you, I'd like to think within the next couple of months we'll be able to say more on where this may be headed.
Can you tell us if this developer will tear it down?
This developer has suggested that they would like to, as part of their project, retain that current building and use it, but I think that's still let to be determined whether it's feasible to make that happen. So it may be raised, it may not. I know that's not a great answer, but have to look at the viability of whether that can be part of what they're hoping to do.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna go back, I just have a quick question. There was an update on that Second Street corridor study. Is there an end date to the authorization, or can that just hang out there till, for 4 years and then till somebody decides to do it?
You mean the finances?
There's that 50,000 and the authorization to do the study, but yet we're 9 months past that now?
Close to that, yeah. No, that resolution authorized the transfer of monies to do the project, but our calendar year, I think, draws into question what monies are intended for what, and I don't know if it has to be reauthorized or how it works as far as whether we'd be allowed to carry the monies over. But believe me, at some point politically, I think we'd have to come back to the body and say, we still want to do this. And you heard loud and clear that the issue is whether or not, we have enough property owner buy-in to make it worth our time to explore. So it's a good question, Steve. I would think as we get into 2019, if we want to do this, you'll see us coming back to the body to, at the very least, get them to express a continued commitment for that transfer of funds.
I was going to talk budget.
Oh, sure.
Then, Mayor, you had the first budget meeting, right, on Monday? Give us your thoughts on how the first meeting went. What you heard, what your takeaway from the initial meeting was.
Well, it was, the meeting actually went quite smooth. Steve and the staff for the last 6 weeks have been, burning both ends of the candle, I will tell you. They've been working very hard to put the budget together. Originally there was authorized to increase taxes up to 4.5%. It was never intended to go that high. It was a parameter, just a parameter. But it gave some flexibility as far as what to do. So Steve and the staff worked tirelessly on getting that down to where we wouldn't have to see that large of a tax increase at all. And then in the last 10 days of the budget, when it was just about ready to be printed, we had a couple surprises. One was the reduction of $94,000 in state aid, and this is a running 6-year cycle that they do, and apparently 6 years ago we didn't spend as much in roads there, and that adds into it. So what that means is we got $94,000 less. That was a big one to take because we were already going to be facing a tax increase. Because one thing we did not want to do is cut the road work that we were going to do. Everybody was convicted we're not going to do that, because one thing that the citizens of Marshfield are united on is, it's the one thing I hear all the time: fix the roads. So then we had another issue come up where with the assessor, where there was a $193,000 or so difference in the amount of personal property tax that we would be receiving back from the state. And so it looked like not only were we hit with the $94,000, but we are hit with $193,000 less. And so that has to do with a different amendment that the state legislature put in, and so this caused a series of phone calls, which I did thank in the council meeting. We got together with Senator Petrusky, Representative Spiros, and we went over this, and it was a very spirited meeting on what is going on here. We get these notifications 10 days before our budgets are due. Well, the great news is with this is there was a flaw in the formula somehow of the personal property tax exemption. They take it out in one area, they give it to you in an area, and we were not aware that we were going to get it in this other area. So that's where we actually came up with, I believe it's $218,000.
Correct.
So now, the great thing is Steve and the staff had already worked on getting keeping the tax increase to 1.97, which on a $100,000 home, their taxes would go from $920 to $938. So effectively, it's $9.38 per thousand. Steve did a great job in the meeting of showing what our neighboring cities are paying, and even with that increase, we're still substantially lower than everybody else. So that was a good thing. Great thing that came out of that is, with that $218,000, because of the additional cuts that Steve and the staff had already made, we're in a position now where we have one of three options. I'm a big advocate of one of them. Number one is to take that $218,000 and refund or reactivate some of the cuts that we made. That is an option. Number two is to take it and put in our reserve account, or what I call our savings account, saving for a rainy day. One thing I will say for that is, in Steve's presentation, our reserve amount right now is certainly within normal limits. So it would be nice to make that a little bit padded a little bit, save for a rainy day. But since we're already in realistic, we have a realistic amount in there, I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing to do. Certainly, it would make you feel better to have a little bit more in savings. I'm using that term lightly. And the third option is the one that I'm going to advocate heavily for, and that is no tax increase. Because if our savings is in line, and we already made cuts that we didn't want to do them, but we had to, so there was an argument there that we can cut this for now. For me, then, it doesn't make any sense then to raise the tax rate. I think if we can come out of this budget without a tax increase, I think that would be great. However, I will say, each of the options is good. We're not faced with having to do something. Now we can really sit back and absorb. The council can sit back and absorb, okay, now what do we think is in the best interest of the citizens and the city in a whole? From my formulation, it's no tax increase. And I'm very, very strong about that. And I will advocate for that hard. But the council members are the ones that make that decision. So from that, we're in a good place. But I will tell you, another thing that Steve did is showed that our amount of debt has been trending up. And we were at, I believe, 60%, and it ticked down. So I believe that our numbers are headed in the right direction. But ultimately, to answer your question, I thought the meeting went great. And I'll say this probably another dozen times until the budget is over. Steve and his staff have done a tremendous job, and it's nice to be in the position to have these options.
Yeah, I would just add to that the council, the mayor, are in a position now where there is no necessarily right answer. All three things are good. Adding to our reserve balance, or I should say protecting so that we don't use as much of our reserve balance to balance the budget is a good thing. Restoring cuts, certainly if certain items, and they've got the laundry list of things that I pulled out, which I should tell you too, is not all pure cuts. That's cuts from submitted budgets. So in some cases, I removed things from the budget that were submitted that would have been new. So they're not cuts the way some people might think of them. They're removals from the department submissions. But some are really truthfully cuts from things that we've done in the past, or reductions in them. That's number two. And then number three, as the mayor mentioned, is to reduce or eliminate the tax increase. So It's really gonna come down now to the council's view of those three things of which has the most merit. And it can be a mix and match, and it may well be a mix and match of two or perhaps all three of those items.
Just to clarify some things on that $218,000. That was Act 59 from 2017, correct?
Correct.
And that law specifically laid out that we were getting this money, right?
Yeah, and I'm, at this point in the discussion, I'm just taking full credit for the fact, or full responsibility, it's not credit. Full responsibility for this. I mean, I'd heard about the act, obviously we heard that was going through, and they did send us something in August that slipped underneath the radar about how this was all gonna play out. And so I apologize, we probably should have picked up on it. I know at staff level sometimes we get a little frustrated with the email notices we get sometimes and how they blend into all sorts of other stuff that they send us from Madison every day. But yes, it's from that act, and I'm very hopeful, as is the mayor, I'm sure, and the council, that the offset will continue. One of the things you see sometimes in government is that initially there's a full or close to full offset for lost revenue, but over time that's weaned down to where it evaporates on you. And I'm hopeful as we go into 2020 and beyond that offset will remain as it is. I don't know if there's truthfully a commitment to that, or if that's a budget issue for the state every 2 years.
And both Senator Petrusky and I will tell you, Senator Petrusky and his staff have been unbelievable over the last 10 days, as well as Representative Spiros, in getting there was a real misunderstanding about it at many different levels. And so getting this clarification is no doubt will help us in our next budget season. And a lot has to do with how they were able to get involved and get some things clarified.
I think the whole thing, maybe it threw us a little bit too, is they've been saying that they were going to make us whole. We didn't really know what that was going to look like. So when our assessor said, "Hey, your value's dropped a lot. You got some issues here," I don't think the dots all connected in terms of, okay, well, where's this other payment coming from? Because we don't see anything specific that identifies it. And if it flew below the radar, we apologize.
And ultimately on this decision of what takes place of those three options, what option are we going to take? Or as Steve said, maybe you do a little bit of all three. Even though I do not get a vote in this situation, I do want to make it very clear as the mayor of Marshville that I am not in favor of a tax increase since we've made this. We've done this and we've already made these cuts. I believe that we should go with that. And as long as our numbers are all correct, we have the right amount of reserves, and obviously it'd always be nice to have a little bit more in savings. I get that, but there are a lot of people out there, even though the economy is doing great, we've got record low unemployment, wages have taken a hike. The numbers really look good, but there are still people out there that struggle. And I would hate the fact that we're putting more in our savings and those people that are struggling have to pay a couple of extra dollars. For me, that's just not, that doesn't work.
And I don't disagree with that. Let me just make one clarification though, when we talk about savings. The proposed budget included $750,000 in general fund balance applied. Normally we'd be more like in the $500,000 range. And that was because of some of the stresses we talked about with the assessed valuation and the transportation aid loss. So in a sense, it's right if the council decides to put, let's say, $100,000 of that 218 into the reserve account, but just so you know, that is still going to leave it at a level that's more than we would normally use. Not the end of the world by any means, because we're above the 30% that the auditor has as a top end anyway. But it would, because usually what happens is, let's say we balance the budget with $500,000 of general fund reserves, but we get to the end of the year and we have a surplus of $450,000, because in a $22 million general fund budget, that's not uncommon. So it ends up being way closer to a wash than you would expect. In this case, I think if we actually did use $750,000, it won't be a wash. I expect that we'll end up really reducing it from 31% to some other number. But as the mayor is saying, the auditor recommends 25 to 30%, and there's no question that even with that reduction, we'll still be toward the top end of that scale.
One other question on the budget. Being a political nerd, I spent a lot of time flipping through it, and I noticed an item being borrowed for. There's $100,000 being borrowed for pavement rehab for North Central Avenue from Harmel to Harrison. Is that related to the state project? Or is that something separate the city's doing to mitigate the current?
That's our portion of the project. When we met with DOT, they said, if you remember, first it was going to be a reconstruction. We're going to rebuild the whole street.
Yeah.
And of course, the state's in the same bind as we are trying to pay for reconstructions. They oftentimes become just resurfacing. But still, there's some things we negotiated, our staff did, that we'd like to see done, turn lanes or parking, the parking aisle and those types of things, that is on us. And 100,000 I know sounds like a lot, but in the bigger scope of what they're going to pay for that stretch, it's fairly small.
Okay.
That's our portion of a much bigger pot that's largely the state's responsibility.
Then, follow up on that, I'm assuming that there was money borrowed last year when the project was planned to be completed. Did that get reallocated for something else, or?
I don't know that to be the case. That's a
Okay.
good question. That normally what you're suggesting is very true. We would either, if we didn't think it was going to be spent at all, we would reallocate it, but
Okay.
we knew it was coming up, so I'm guessing we haven't spent it.
Okay,
But then you're wondering why you see it
yeah,
shown in that document. Really good question. I'll find out the answer for you.
awesome.
Mayor, I wanted to get your thoughts on it's not a lot of money, it was 12,000, but for site evaluation services for possible relocation of the police station. Just, I guess, get your thoughts on the direction the council took there on Monday, and what you think of that direction, and where you think that issue might be headed. Is that something you're comfortable with, or just get your thoughts on that topic in general?
It's a very interesting topic. Being new to this, there's there's so much to learn as far as protocol and everything else. We're spending money to do a study on where we might put something. I guess in my book, I'd like to come up with suggestions on what we think. We know the city pretty well. Where could we put it to save that $12,000? But there's a lot that goes into it. So I am in favor of, we just do a lot of studies. And when you start doing 12,000 for this study and 20,000 for this study, as an example, I was dealing with Justin Casperson on I had this wild idea about the ponds over there at Wildwood. Could we turn that into a beach for families? And he says, well, we'd have to do a study. Well, we already know there's water there. What are we get a study? And they says, how much would this study be? $20,000 to do this study. And I don't know, I just think sometimes the studies get, in a bigger view, sometimes the studies come in, the people come in, they ask you what you want, you tell them what you want, and then they go basically, sometimes it feels like give you validation to what you want. Well, we already know what we want. Does that make sense? In a very odd fashion. In the bigger picture, the reason I do support this though, is because we do need to take a look at our where the police station is. There's some uncomfortableness for many on the council that it's so close to the railroad. The argument, and there's arguments for and against, right? The argument is the railroad has been there for a long time and nothing has ever happened, but when accidents do happen, they're never planned. So, do we want to stay there or do we want to move somewhere different? The chief has made his, Police Chief Rick Grams has made his ideas very clear that he wants to be somewhere in the downtown area so that he can get places easily. So certainly it's worth making a study for this to see where those places are.
I think that the council, when staff came to the council in September, Dan Connect made a little presentation and said, hey, what do you think? We're following up on the July meeting with the Police and Fire Commission and our time with the consultants. If and when we do something in the future, are you more favorable to doing some renovation on site or to looking for a new location? We were sort of hoping that it would be a clear-cut response, and I think what you saw if you were there that night back in September is it was a real mixed bag. About half of the members said that they think it would be better to try to rebuild on site, to renovate and make use of the existing facility. And then half said, similar to what Bob just said, that, you know, based on the location adjacent to the tracks, it's not a good place, and you know, why spend, in some cases, why spend good money after bad to take a building and renovate it when you're going to spend a good share of the cost of a new facility just upgrading a current one, and that we ought to look elsewhere. So I think staff came out of that with, we really didn't have clear direction as to whether the ultimate goal someday down the road would be a new site or renovating this one, and we felt it was probably best to find out what a new site would even mean. Are there other feasible sites? So it's absolutely true. You're spending money to study something that may not happen. That sounds like government 101, but at least it tells us if there becomes a growing thought that we ought to leave the current site for whatever reason, at least we know what might be viable and feasible.
Is there another reason beside the railroad track? Have they outgrown that building in any way, or are there issues with the building, or is it simply just the location?
No, if you've ever been in there, it's a real maze. And I sometimes question why it was designed that way anyway, because I mean, it doesn't seem like it was ever the most functional, but I wasn't here back when that was built. But right now you have circumstances where you have detectives and all different types of functionality areas, functional areas are kind of disjointed as to where they sit, how they interact with each other. And what they really would like to do, in a sense, would be to knock out, you know, a couple walls and reorganize the space, make it more functional for them for what they do. Well, that costs money. In fact, when you start knocking out walls, it costs a lot of money. So the thought is, among some people at least, why would we spend $3 or $4 million to do that and still have the same building close to the tracks and close to the parkway that we have it, or maybe isn't the best location? Why would we not look at spending money to buy a new site and put up a new building? But the reason to answer your question is it's just not as fully functional as it could be. Even though it's smaller than we would like, we're not making the best use of the space today.
And they need storage for the vehicles,
Also
for extreme heat or certainly extreme cold. The vehicles are, the Chief Grams says many times they'll leave those cars on for up to 20 hours. They're in there in the station, they can't turn the vehicle off when it's 15 below because of the electronics in there. They've got to keep it heated to a certain level. So that is a real big issue there. And one thing when they were looking at taking a look at, you know, remodeling what they currently have, the bids went anywhere from $3 million all the way up to $9 million based on what needed to be done. So you really run into an issue, and as they were going through this, they said, now these numbers are based on utopia. And of course the question is, well, what is utopia? This is assuming you have no surprises. Well, we all know that when you go to do a remodel or something like that, there's always a surprise. And then to go to brand new was going to be between 11 and 14 million. So those numbers, it's too big of a range there. So this is why when we take a look at the study and we see what different properties are available, you might have acquisition costs you've got to factor in. There's a lot of variables that are going along, and this isn't, you know, we're not going to put up a new police station next year, but we have to start planning for one.
And I'm very glad you brought up the garage. That is really where it started with. I came on board in January of 2011, and the first thing I heard was that they wanted to put a garage for the reasons mentioned as far as the vehicles being stored out of the elements, but also they have weapons in there, lots of radio equipment. They don't need people having access to potentially break into one of those vehicles. But you would never spend $800,000 or more to build a nice new large garage for police vehicles and equipment if you might move in 2 years. That would make us look as dumb as it gets, like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So that kind of has triggered the whole issue of how long are we going to be there? Is this a forever home or is this a very short-term home?
Are there any city-owned properties currently that would possibly work for that, like just at a very high-level conceptual idea? I mean, obviously, there's probably one right to my back. I mean, outside of that one, is there anything else in town right now, or would we be looking at buying that we're aware of that might?
That's a great question. I mean, it is. Yeah. it's pretty obvious where there's one, but we don't know what we're gonna do, and there's, right now, anything is on the table.
Okay.
So to answer your question, there's nothing that I'm aware of in the city and downtown that would be, that we could do. So this is why their study is gonna be so important, because what would you have to do? Outside of the very obvious. But yeah,
Okay.
your question is well taken.
We heard the night that the consultants were here back in July that we need about 3 acres, maybe a little bit more than 3 acres. So that'll be the starting point, that whatever site it is, it requires 3 to maybe 4 acres for the building, the parking, the perimeter landscaping and green space needed for a decent police facility. So that'll be the starting point as they look around the community. And you can be assured that they're not going to look at sites that are right on the border, right on McMillan or right on 29th, because quite frankly, those are nowhere near centrally located. So hopefully we can find a handful of sites to evaluate.
And we want to make sure that it's really what the chief and all the police officers want, because I believe that the worst thing, you see this all the time when you hire things out, they'll say, the best thing that whoever's doing the presentation, and no disrespect to them, the best place to put it is over here. And then the chief and the police officers don't like that location. We're really going to be swayed very heavily on what the chief and the officers want, because that is of the utmost importance. Sometimes the theoretical should be is different than the reality of what should be. That was kind of a fun
That was good.
I just made that.
Can you remember that, David?
So just to verify on the insurance, so it's a 10% increase for health, everything else pretty much stays the same, right? And then I just want to clarify some points on it's kind of not necessarily directly related to the item, but on the HSAs, that's through Forward Financial Bank, correct?
Well, they handle the accounts, correct?
So, I'm just wondering on the ethics issue, Mayor, on handling that debate as an employee of Forward Financial Bank and chairing the debate and being even nominally involved, is that a conflict of interest?
That took place long before I was mayor. That was the way the city has that established. And so chairing it, I didn't see any conflict of interest because it was already taking place.
And for the record, we did at the time that we first set up this arrangement a couple of years ago, we did look at all financial institutions in town. I think we looked at BMO Harris and Associated and everybody to see what they could offer in terms of managing those accounts. So it was done with a typical solicitation.
And then, do we know how many other accounts the city has with Forward Financial? I don't know.
Truthfully, I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
The big one, of course, is the one we have with Citizen State Bank of Loyal.
Okay.
That'll be coming up for RFP for just general banking services for all of our accounts in, I think it's the summer of 2019.
Okay.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see Forward put a bid in along with the other institutions I just named. There are a lot of people who would like to have our business. We have a lot of money to manage, and that's a good thing for a bank. But other than that, I'm not aware of any specific monies or accounts or whatever that are managed or used with Forward,
Okay.
unless I'm forgetting something.
Okay. Sounds good. That's the last thing I think.
Let me just extrapolate a little bit on the health insurance thing too. You say, well, the city is again facing another 10% increase. The renewal notice we got from Security was up in the neighborhood of 17 point something. We've been battling for years, and I think some of you who've been around know that, with our health insurance in terms of utilization. We have some individuals have some circumstances where we have high dollar claims that are continuing because of family health issues and no fault of their own. But we've been doing everything we can to encourage better consumerism, to encourage people to talk to their doctors about what prescriptions are made. Is there a generic equivalent for that drug? Are there other ways that we can deal with my health issue rather than certain types of surgeries or whatever? But it's a battle. It's a battle, and every time we go out to bid, which we didn't this year because you can't do that every year, you wear out the market. But every time we go to bid and we say, well, hey, we're a good customer. Well, you've got $1.20 of claims that have to be paid for every dollar of premium you send in. Yeah, that's good, huh? We've been bringing that down over time. We've slowly gotten it down to a level closer to dollar for dollar, premium versus claims, but we're not there, and that's why we keep having these increases. But we've got 80% of our employees now in the HSA. There may be a day when we eliminate the traditional plan altogether. Right now, we're not doing that because we feel there's some value to that for certain employees who have medical challenges. But we're looking at every possible cost-saving measure to keep health insurance down. But still, as I think Tom Butke said the other night, provide quality insurance for our employees.
That's the last thing I had.
If you're around for a couple minutes packing stuff up, I can try and find out about that borrowing thing. 'Cause that's a really good question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
It's still not.